A lot of times I didn't get what I asked for, but I actually just got comfortable asking for it. I think for me, it's like recognize the discomfort, see it, acknowledge it, and then do it anyways.
Oh my God. I love it. Hey friends, welcome to Smart Venture Podcast, the best information for future CEOs. Starting a company is easy, but growing and managing it is hard. In this podcast, we sit down with the best founders, experienced leaders, and investors in tech and relevant space to give you the best tips to grow your company and grow yourself. If you like it, don't forget to subscribe and give it a 5-star. Hi, Loni. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me.
So to start off the show, can you tell us a little bit more about like how did you grow up and how did you get into law and tech?
Yeah. So I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. I came out to California for college. And I think actually pretty early on, I knew I wanted to go to law school, though I wasn't totally sure what that meant. I really like to argue. I was very argumentative. So it always seemed like a thing I should do. But when I was in college, my boyfriend at the time, my now husband, his father was a lawyer at a big New York law firm and was bouncing ideas off of him. And, what he sold me on was this idea that like lawyers are problem solvers. And that like really appealed to me. And so, that was not really knowing a whole lot of what I was getting into, kind of took that and ran with it and decided to go to law school.
Yeah, like I love it. So like in law school, like tell us more about like, when you first got into law school, like what did you want to do back then? Like were your plan always going into tech or was it just like becoming one of the top lawyers? Like how do you plan out this whole journey?
Yeah, I had no idea that I would end up in tech. I didn't even know the full breadth of what lawyers do, to be honest with you. I knew what litigators did, and that was the road I went down when I was in law school. I didn't even really conceive of sort of corporate law and some of these other areas that were out there. But I just, I was sort of interested in kind of went down the road that is maybe a little bit what a lot of people do. I went to a law firm. I found a law firm that I thought would be interesting. And it was great. I had a lot of people that I'm still very, very close with. But through that process, I was at the law firm for like 7 years. Really was like, this isn't the place that I want to be for the long run. It's not utilizing, I think, some of these other skills that I had. I remember really clearly one day thinking to myself, I should get into tech. There's a lot of stuff happening in tech. 7 years later, here I am, doing a lot of fun and interesting stuff that I never would have thought of at Lyft. So.
Yeah. So like in terms of like picking the law firm, can you break it down for us? Like what exactly are some qualities that you feel like lawyer have, and then your current job at a tech company practicing law or like practicing policy and development, like what is the differences, and then also like what are some core qualities that a lawyer have that can translate into your current role?
I think that there was something the practice of law at the law firm is very regimented in some ways, especially when you're a litigator. There's a lot of rules, there's a lot of procedure. There is ways that things are done. The way you draft a summary judgment motion or take a deposition, all of that is already kind of set and scripted. And there are people that are really good at that and they know how to do that really well. I think I did fine at that. It was fine. It wasn't really where I excelled though. And I realized that at some point along the way that I had other skills to bring to bear that I really wasn't utilizing fully in the law firm world. What those things that sort of became clear to me was, collaborative person by nature, really working across teams, working with other people, helping explain what the law means, distilling that down into actionable advice for people that are trying to kind of create new products or figure out what to do around the constraints of the law. That was sort of my first use of the law in the tech setting. It was really helping people understand what the law is and what to do about where things are in the moment. So yeah, I think there's like a pretty big difference. And for me, I found my application of legal knowledge to be much better used in the business setting than in the law firm setting.
Yeah, totally. So we'll get to how you pivot into from law to tech a little bit later. So I know that I think when going into law school just to get in, to take the LSAT and everything, like you must be I feel like you must be a great test taker, great student. And how do you acquire these knowledge very quickly? What would be some habit that you have that you assume maybe other people don't, to help you acquire these really complicated, sophisticated like law knowledge?
I probably don't have anything groundbreaking here, to be honest. Like I was always a good student. I studied hard. I read a lot. I followed the rules of school. I always did that. I loved law school. I thought it was super interesting. But again, it was very linear, right? Like I kind of knew what you had to do. You studied hard. You read a lot. You did practice exams. You took really detailed notes in law school. I went over my notes a million different times, distilled them down over and over again. It's sort of not it's not all that interesting in some ways. But what I think has been interesting is that those skills were so important, I think, to get me to law school and to do well in law school. But if I had sort of stopped at that place, I think I would have just stopped at being a good student. I really had to kind of learn and grow beyond that, take risks, do things that were outside of my comfort zones, do things that weren't so linear, and like a clear path forward. That's where big changes happened for me in my own personal development.
Yeah, totally. So like we just talk about like the basically like how you acquire knowledge. So like in terms of building up your personal skills, like you accomplished like where you are today, like as a VP of Lyft, like I feel like in a way faster speed than a lot of people. So what do you view as like three characteristics that you have that other people don't, that like make you even more successful than them?
I think a couple things that come to mind, and they're sort of in no particular order. One, I am willing to take risks. I'm willing to do things that are like outside of my comfort zone and push forward positions that I am not certain how they're going to land, or have conversations with more senior people that are not super comfortable. So one, I think, is like willing to take risks. Another is that I lean in really hard on collaboration. I probably over index on working with other teams and other people, to make sure we all are operating from the same page. And then I think sort of relatedly is getting buy-in and consensus building. Again, you can't go too far on that. At some point you have to be directive and make a call, and like not everybody's going to agree, and that's okay. But I think that like I know where other people's positions are, how they're thinking about things, helping them understand what my position is. I think that is actually how you can kind of get a larger organization or a larger group of people to move forward.
Yeah, totally. So like in terms of like building up your own like work cohort, or like, like you are very successful nowadays. Like I'm curious about, when you first started, and who do you ask for career advice? And nowadays, like you are the mentor of many people at Lyft or also the organization. Who do you, like nowadays, like who do you ask for career advice? Like who is on your quote unquote personal board of advisors?
Yeah, totally. I've just started using that term, by the way, and I love it. It like really, it actually totally resonates. And I've been very intentional about sort of my own personal board of directors or board of advisors recently. And I have a lot more now than I used to. I think one of the most awesome things about Lyft has been the like network of people and the community of people that I know and rely on. And that's actually some of the payoff of all the getting buy-in and consensus building that I do in my work, is like there's a million people out there that I can turn to if I have questions in a specific area. But sort of for general advice building, I think there's like a couple people that I rely on, and they're sort of from Lyft and from pre-Lyft time. So one is John Levin, who is the named partner of the former law firm that I was at. So he's one of the first people I go to when I'm sort of talking about stuff, and sometimes it's legal and sometimes it's not. He's a guy who has like a huge amount of experience in the world, and honestly has been one of my biggest advocates. Like before, he saw something in me before I saw something in myself. So I lean on him a lot. There's other people that I've met sort of in the law firm world and at the Lyft world. Another person is named Albert Young. He's an outside lawyer that I worked with at Lyft, and I became super close with him, and I talked to him a lot. And then outside of the law, our former head of communications, Will Valentine, has become a very, very close friend, and is someone I rely on a lot for professional advice. And then I always go back to Kristen Sverchek, who's Lyft's general counsel. We were friends before Lyft, but now we work together extremely closely. I mean, she was my boss for a long time, but she's just sort of an incredible person who's navigated really, really interesting and crazy legal waters for a long time. So I rely on her quite a bit too.
Yeah, totally. So in terms of if someone trying to replicate your success, even they're not practicing law, what characteristics should they look for in their quote unquote board of advisors?
Someone just asked me that question just earlier this week. And what I said was like, one of the things that I think that I lead on, especially John, as I was mentioning, are those people that sort of seem to see something in you and like seem to support you when you're a little bit like, I don't really know why they're doing that. And they're a little more senior than you. And you're sort of like, okay, they seem to like, they can kind of help build me up until I realize I'm there. I think those types of people can actually be really helpful because they can just help you see things a little bit before you do. And then I would say probably pick somebody that's like in your professional area and then somebody who's not in your professional area. Those are I think those might be, good, useful guideposts as you're thinking about, who to rely on yourself.
Totally. Do you see them as like someone who is like a little bit more senior than you, or are they like some of them you see as peers? Like curious, how do you maintain the conversation with them? Since I feel like for example, if I asked you to be my mentor, like I don't want to be like a one-side way, like, you just input on me all the time. And like, I don't want to take advantage of anyone. How do I build the kind of like more mutual relationship with both parties?
I think it's a great question. I think what I was surprised to find is that people want to do this, right? It's like if there's somebody that you are thinking about and they don't reciprocate or they're not interested, and you don't have to ask explicitly. If it just doesn't feel like the rapport is there, then you just don't explore it any further. And actually I had an example like that. So I'm talking to so many people right now, just reaching out and thinking about, what else is out there in the world. And there was a woman that I had a great conversation with a year ago, and she's been in a super high profile position. I reached out to her and thought she might be someone interesting to talk to again. She totally blew me off. And I was like, okay, no problem. Like, she's got other things going on. It's not nothing personal, but I'm like, okay, she's not one of those people that's going to be in my, circle. Exactly. But I think that like even more senior people, so I have more senior people and then I also have peers, and the peer group is easy because like you kind of are just talking about back and forth what they're going through, what you're going through. You might have one conversation might be about you, another conversation's about them. The more senior people though, I really think that you'd be surprised how much people want to help other people. They want to help people move forward and figure out how to get to the next stage in their career.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. So now I assume you encounter all your mentors through work, or like, have you ever just like reach out to someone who is completely not in the zone, like not in your existing circle? And like in terms of like keeping in touch with all of these people, what's the frequency and what is like the actual action that you took to reach out to them? Is that going to be phone call? Is that going to be email? So, I mean, why I ask is I find this really interesting because I've heard different stories. Some people are just like, oh yeah, I was just texting my VC. He's like my mentor. And there was also people are like, oh, our like whole conversation is majorly happening on email. So curious on your take on this.
It's a total grab bag for me. It really fluctuates. So when things are really crazy at work, I will look up and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I haven't talked to anybody that's sort of in my general network in ages because I've been so heads down and immersed in work and family. And then I'll have little bits of moments where I kind of lift my head up and I'm like, oh, I got a little bit more time and I'm like reaching out to people. And when I'm in those moments, I actually like do a couple things. Like one, I actually have like a list. I have like a list of people that I should talk to. And every time I talk to somebody I haven't really talked to recently, like who else should I talk to? They give me a name. I add it to my list. I like make a note of like the last time I spoke to somebody. I'm not always that organized, but like sometimes I am, and it helps me keep track of like who I'm talking to. And then my touch points like really vary. Like sometimes it's a text message, and sometimes it's like, for me, it's the most in-depth conversations tend to be on phone calls, but I'll stay in touch with somebody via text. I'm much more verbal than I am written. So like, I'm not likely to like do a whole bunch of in-depth stuff in an email.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love it. Thank you for sharing with us, by the way. And you started at Lyft as associate general counsel, and now you're the VP of Policy Development and Research.
Yeah.
So yeah, like curious, talk about like when you started, like what's your workload like what do you do on a daily basis, and like what do you do now on a daily basis?
It's totally different. In 6 years, it's like my job is like 100% different. So like just day to day, when I came in, I was handling all employment related issues for the company, big and small. So that was, helping the people HR team with, HR terminations and things like that, and investigations to, individual claims that somebody might make for workers' compensation or something like that, all the way up to like big ticket class action litigation related to driver and employment status. So, but it was like a lot of small stuff in addition to a lot of big stuff. I had like individual claims. I'd get, voicemails forwarded to me from other people in the company of some claimant that made some small claims, like a $5,000 claim, less than $5,000 claim in some court in Georgia, be like handling those and navigating and managing all those like small day-to-day things. What I do now is like totally different world, and sort of policy development and sort of thinking more proactively and long-term about what the law is and where the law should be going and how you kind of craft some of these new structures. But I think that like the biggest difference that I've seen sort of in at a more 30,000 foot level is like Kristen Sverchek, the Lyft GC. She really created a very business oriented legal team. They are like very integrated with the business to make sure that it's like helping to drive business needs. But that's fundamentally different than that's still sort of supporting the business sort of as a business support function, versus I think what I do a lot of now, which is driving Lyft's business objectives in my own right. And I really like sort of that thing that's different about sort of being on the legal team versus driving business goals through my own initiatives. That's a big change, and that's one that I've actually very much enjoyed.
Yeah, totally. So I bet in terms of the skills at the beginning, I assume you're handling a lot of really detailed cases, and probably a lot of were just like a lot of like using a lot of your knowledge. So nowadays, like I'm assuming you're more on the leadership or like vision or strategy. So how do you quickly adopt those like skills or like knowledge? How do you quickly transition yourself within 6 years from like a position that's more on the junior side to now like a more like senior leadership in a company?
Yeah, I've had to be really intentional about it, because there are times where I feel like I've sort of taken leaps ahead before I was quite ready. And I had to kind of catch up with myself. And like for me, for my own personal style, I felt most comfortable when I was the subject matter expert. I knew all the details, and I really needed to like recognize that I had other skills to bear, and I needed to lean in on those other things like vision setting, leading a team of diverse experts who have expertise that I know nothing about. How do I organize that type of team? How do I help drive our, what the policy team is trying to do within Lyft and with outside of Lyft? I have to think about it, because like it wasn't natural for me. I had to recognize that it was a different skill set that I needed to lean on, and like that was okay. And then I needed to find people to help me, right? Like I have people that within Lyft who I would talk about this with, and they would sort of help me think about like how to do some of that different type of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So you basically elevate yourself to accelerate your success. Tell us more about, how do you kind of like promoting yourself within the organization?
I had this moment, I think that I know that I'm going to look back and know it was like a pivotal moment in my career, and something that like I think will have always made the difference for me, when that was my first promotion to VP on the legal team. I thought that I should have been promoted. I thought my work spoke for itself. But in that round of reviews, I had got great reviews. Everything's going great. You're, doing wonderful. Rating system, doing great. But unfortunately, I was told I did not get the promotion. And also one of my colleagues, who was absolutely wonderful and totally deserved the promotion, he did get it. So I thought he absolutely should have, but I should have too. And right. It really rocked me. I really was like, I can't believe that like my work didn't demonstrate that I should get this. And really kind of going outside of my own comfort zone. I had conversations with both my manager at the time and our co-founder, and made the case and was like, said, this is why I think I should, and really went through all the different things, answered the questions of why I thought that I didn't get it in the first round. And did sort of self-promotion in a really uncomfortable way for me. Was before that meeting, like walking around outside, like in tears, not really sure if I could do it. But like steeled myself, went in, and it was so interesting because as I was talking, I could like see that some of what I was saying was resonating. I didn't expect anything different to happen from it, but it did. But what also happened was that in that moment of like really standing up for myself and articulating like what I brought to the company, I also just changed other people's view of what I could do. Like just that act changed other people's view of like who I was and what I could do. So it was like a really important moment for me, I think, personally and professionally. And now I kind of like think about that, and all the sort of, especially more junior women that I sort of informally mentor, we will practice talking to their manager, right? We'll do like role playing of like, okay, you're going to ask for a promotion. You're going to ask for more money. Let's go through it. Yes. And then they'll say some of the reasons why. They're like, oh, but I don't know if I should get it right now. Sometimes there's always a little seed of self-doubt. I'm like, okay, hear it and then move forward. Let's keep practicing. Even if it doesn't, even if you don't get it, right? Because like sometimes it doesn't always work out that you self-promote and you get the thing that you want, but it's still a step that you should take, if for no other reason than you're setting yourself up for the future.
Totally. I love it. First of all, I love this story. And like when you talked to me about it, I was like, this have to be on the show. And so I have there's two questions around it. Like one is, from you mentioned about emotionally, you're crying outside and like, you are not comfortable with like, asking for what you quote unquote deserve. And so like one thing is as like someone who is a female, like I always feel shy or like ashamed of like, this is what I want, and like monetary wise, right? Like, so I feel like asking for money has never been like something that I completely comfortable about doing, and curious about, what's the emotional journey like, and how do you conquer yourself on, this is what I deserve, or like, this is what I can see myself doing. And on the other hand, there's like the tactics, right? So, if you were just coming in and then be like, negotiating on this is what I think I need to get, and like how do you play that quote unquote role play that you do with your more junior peers, or like people who ask you for advice?
On the compensation side, it's interesting. I wasn't ever very aggressive about it at the law firm, and it's largely lockstep, so there isn't much room to do anything. But at Lyft, I didn't even negotiate as hard coming into the Lyft as I should have. And it took me, that's a big mistake, right? Because like, that's when you have the most leverage and the most like opportunity, especially at a pre-public company, you're negotiating your equity. And I did not negotiate hard enough. And I knew that as soon as I got to Lyft. And so I was like, I'm never going to make that mistake again. And so, during lots of review cycles, I would make a request, and I would say, this is what I think I should get. And a lot of times I didn't get what I asked for, but I actually just got comfortable asking for it. I think for me, it's like recognize the discomfort, see it, acknowledge it, and then do it anyways.
Oh my God. I love it. Yeah. What do you tell yourself? So for example, I went into this meeting. So how should I prepare for it? Should I just research everybody else's salary and then be like, this is what I think I should have? Or like, what is like the actual steps that you take?
Yeah, if you have any concrete information, it's the best way to go in, right? Like if you have a sense of sort of where comparable peers are, it's the most grounded way that you can talk about it. If you don't have that, you can sort of make a guess and then just tie it to the work that you're doing, and see what happens. Like I have made unreasonable requests. There was a time like once when I was like, I wanted sort of an equity increase in an off-cycle review. And Kristen kind of like laughed at me because it was like ridiculous. It wasn't even like close to possible. But I'm still glad I did it. Like I also got a sense of like what the like bounds were that she was dealing with, of sort of, because you don't even really know what your manager has, at least at a company like Lyft. managers are constrained in sort of the budgetary process of what they have to offer as well. So like, sometimes there's just not a lot there and you just need to know what the constraints are. And then sometimes you have to like go outside of what the allocated process is and have an exception. And like those things are few and far between. But yeah, if you have information and data, that's like definitely the best way to go.
Totally. Yeah. So I like, first of all, I love it. I love like you're kind of like making a mini movement like in Lyft to, you know, helping other people too to, you know, get more like what they, more of what they deserve, like asking for the next steps, right? Like I feel like this is like a really powerful move. And like we talk a little bit more about like the, you know,
by the
user.
way, I should say that like part of me feels like embarrassed. Like I don't anymore, but for a while felt embarrassed to talk about this, right? That like I had to self promote. Like how come I didn't get the promotion right off the bat myself? Like what does that mean? What does that say about me? I moved past that, but like it was definitely a real feeling of like, well, why did I have to do that at all? But on balance, it's like I'm glad that I did. I think it was, you know, I'm glad that I did, and I'm glad that I'm talking about it.
This is really empowering. I feel like we probably need more of this, like to, you know, like move things forward with like the equal pay and everything else. I feel like this is what you're doing is like amazing to hear. And like, I personally feel really uncomfortable asking about money too. Even I feel like I've done enough, but I would not ask. And I would just like, assuming the other person will just like give me something, but like, you know, they will never do it. So you have
not
to
as much as they should. It's just the way the system is set up. And the thing that is like what I realize, and you know it too, right? Which is that like there are people who will just ask for more. And they will
totally.
More simply because they have, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Like this is so true. Yeah, like I'm so glad that you're bringing this into the show, and like I feel like more people should be doing this. And curious about, you know, we talk about like the future of work, and then you know, how you kind of position yourself within the organization to sort of like, I wouldn't say set up your own position, but I don't know if that's the truth, but like, you know, you sort of created this position for yourself. Tell us more about, you know, how do you create a position for you, and like what do you see in the company that what do they need before you created this?
This was sort of interesting, you know, because I'd always worked on these labor policy type issues from the legal side, but I'd worked with other people within the company on all the different aspects of it. I worked with product, I worked with policy. And as things were sort of moving along, I had started sort of a special project with our co-founder, John Zimmer. It was just like a little one-off thing. And then a lot of things changed legally and politically, sort of all at the same time in the middle of 2018. And as we were trying to navigate like an upswell of these issues, it was just, it like hit me like a ton of bricks that the company was just not thinking about these issues in the right way. There were a number of like issues that we were treating as separate things that were all deeply interconnected. That's and we needed to be organizing ourselves as a company around that sort of interconnected issue and have a single threaded owner. And so those were like everything from sort of minimum earnings, like driver minimum earnings, worker protections and worker benefits, 1099 versus W-2 classification, questions about worker voice and bargaining, all the way down to sort of worker displacement due to automation. These sort of like worker issues were all threaded through, and like lots of different people in the company were thinking about pieces, but there needed to be sort of a centralized function around that. And it really hit me. I was like, this is what we need to do. This is what has to happen. And so I kind of put together a little presentation to our two co-founders, our CEO and president, Logan and John, and then our then COO. And I ran through it with Kristen, our GC, the day before. And as I was doing it, you know, she said, well, that looks great. So what are you going to do when they ask you who should run this? And I was like, I don't know. And she's like, well, it's got to be you, right? And I was like, you're right. It does have to be me. Like, I knew it needed to be me, but I still hadn't even said it out loud to myself the day before the meeting. But it also, I was surprised to hear that from her, because that meant that I would be leaving her team to go do this other thing. And I was handling a lot of stuff. It wasn't convenient for her for me to go do something else. So like, I really am so thankful that she kind of gave me the kind of push that I needed. But yeah, that next day I went and did the presentation, and that's exactly what happened. It's like, that sounds great. You're absolutely right. This is what needs to happen. And who should do it? And I said, I should do it. And they're like, you're right. You should. How soon can we make this happen? And so that was sort of the like catalyst for future of work. And there was so much stuff that sort of happened after that, but it was like kind of one of the first times that I put together sort of a view of like what we weren't doing but should be doing, made a pitch around it, and was successful, at least in that first incarnation.
Yeah, totally. So let's let's unpack it a little bit. So in terms of identifying, I assume like when you're creating a position for yourself, you have to first identify there's like a need for this position, because you were going through some other projects and you feel like someone needs to be doing this. And then the second step is you sort of like draft up a plan, right? So in this plan, I'm just curious, when you were trying to convincing more senior leaders, like what do you think they value? Should that be should that be like revenue generation for the company, or should that be like a long-term strategic planning? Like what do they care about? Like if I want to convince someone, like for example, in the future, I mean, I'm my own boss right now, but so like let's say in the future I join a company, and then like what do they care about? Why should I even bring this up? How do I convince them?
Yeah. It has to be driven by the business need. I mean,
Right.
it cannot be just sort of like a personal
Yeah.
desire, or
Yeah,
it just,
totally.
it has to be driven by business need. Now, what that business need is can be multiple different things. It could be revenue growth, which would be a lot of the ways some of the business units think about things. For me, it wasn't so much what there was a fiscal or financial impact for us to think about, and I had that very clearly laid out in what we were talking about.
Right.
But it was more of solving a need. There was a problem, there was a challenge, and like there was a different way to solve it than what we were doing. So that was the business need in that pitch. The other thing that I would say sort of is a key ingredient, at least for this type of pitching something new, was having like a long record of like a trust of
Right.
doing a good job, a really good job at the work in front of you. So it's like, there are people who kind of come in and like haven't really proven themselves and have all kinds of big ideas. Like, I know how to fix everything. That's not really going to get you anywhere. You need to demonstrate that you like that you're really like doing the details of the work that's in front of you, and that you're identifying something new based on business needs, and that is a really important premise too.
I totally agree with you. I think like everything should start off you doing a good job at where you are, about like, your core job function. I feel like you need to build that track record before you are asking for the next like either jump or like creating something new. I feel like you've just done like such a great like demonstration of like what a leader should do in a company. Anyway, so also curious about, I think we also touch on a little bit about in terms of the future of work, what is the concept and like how does it work? Okay, so
One way is like one way to sort of think about this is like there was the structural piece, all these different threads that are sort of within future of work. And a lot of what my team, I sit on the policy team, right? So a lot of what I do is like externally facing policy. So a lot of external negotiations, talking with legislators and the governor's office and things like that, drafting new structures and legislation. That is one piece of what I do. But I think that part of what I've done that I think is like the most interesting and the most valuable for other companies in a lot of ways is actually bring together some of the business units like product and the external affairs functions, which I think is like policy, legal, and product and comms, and sort of more deeply integrating those so that there's like a common dialogue of like what the company is doing, what the consequences of what the company is doing to how the company shows up in the world. That sort of interplay, and that making sure that product understands the policy implications of what they're doing, and that policy understands sort of what product is doing.
Right.
That is the thing that like has been the most interesting to me and that I've like enjoyed the most, because I think it's a different conception of how those teams should work together. What I've seen a lot in how companies organize these things, especially even companies that have like pretty developed policy and legal teams early on, they tend to be fundamentally outward facing. I think that building that internal dialogue back and forth earlier is extremely important. And I, I think that the companies that are starting now are in a different regulatory policy space than even the kind
Mhm.
of Lyft, Uber, Airbnbs of the world, and certainly different than the, first round of tech companies. You go back to
Mhm.
like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, whatever.
Mhm.
Policymakers are aware of what the new startups are doing, especially those that are operating in the regulatory gray space.
Mhm.
They can't just, those young companies cannot just look at where the law is today.
Mhm.
A lawyer can tell them where the law is today. They need
Mhm.
to understand what those policymakers are trying to achieve with those laws and
Mhm.
help them understand where the law is going. They need to be
Mhm.
building their business strategy around where the law is going, not
Mhm.
just where it is right now, because they're not
Mhm.
going to have the luxury of getting to scale before they deal with some of those consequences.
Mhm.
And so for me, like that's like the thing I want to like dig in on more and spend more time on, is just
Mhm.
this like deeper integration of understanding, at least for some companies, this building legal policy regulatory strategy into the business strategy.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. So what do you like? You have like way more experiences in law than like most of our listeners, and curious on, how many changes did like policy change because of the tech innovation?
A lot. And one of
Like,
the things that like I
yeah.
realized is that, because I've had a huge learning curve on this, and I've also
Mhm.
worked with hundreds and hundreds of law firms while I was
Mhm.
on the legal team at Lyft.
Mhm.
Lawyers, traditionally, the lawyers that work at law firms, they have a deep understanding of where the law is today and
Right.
very little understanding of what brought the law to where it is
Mhm.
or where it's going. And for
Mhm.
me, my very simple example of that is I was like a labor and employment lawyer. I knew what
Mhm.
the rules were around like the National Labor Relations Act. But
Mhm.
until I started Future of Work and started doing a whole bunch of history and reading,
Mhm.
and like I had this like a whole long reading list of
Mhm.
and of the history of the American labor movement to
Mhm.
understand why some of the things were constructed in the way that they were. So
Mhm.
when we were making suggestions about what we might do for, a future world, a future state that covered the, lifts of the world, it
Mhm.
was imbued with why things got to where they are today and what we
Mhm.
might do differently. But if I just started from just that, like what it is right now, I never would have had that background.
Mhm.
And you can do that in any area, right? Like you can spend the time to dig in and understand like what it's meant to cover, and then also what policymakers are thinking about and what they're trying to accomplish,
Mhm.
and other interested groups as well. It's not just
Mhm.
policymakers, it's third party groups, it's activists, it's like
Mhm.
there's a whole lot of different stakeholders in that arena. It's a different practice of the law than the ones
Mhm.
that a law firm lawyer would typically think of.
Absolutely. I think this is so valuable. Like you're probably like one of the very few people had like, went through like how the law has been like just like even paying attention to like, how the law has been shaped around the current events or like, why the law is like what it is today. I think this is actually really, really valuable knowledge to have. So in terms of like putting together the strategy for a tech company, you had more experience than anybody else, like in in tech in general. So like where do you perceive like a certain strategy is going to be like in the next 10 years? Like is there any kind of like guideline on this, like for the companies to take? What should I be thinking if I were sort of like, building out like my in-house, like if I'm a startup just building up my own legal team, like how should I go about it in
Yeah, I
general?
mean, most of the companies they'll start with like if they
Mhm.
have hired somebody in that role, which they won't have the resources for a little while, but when they do, they'll
Mhm.
hire a GC. The GC
Mhm.
is going to likely kind of bias toward this law firm world
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
how the law is structured right now. And that's
Right.
probably where they should focus, because they do need
Mhm.
to focus very much on like what exists right now. But there needs
Mhm.
to be, you need to have some input of like where things are going, and finding advisors, somebody to
Mhm.
consult with. There are a lot of actually people in Silicon Valley that are in have some bits of this experience, and talking to some of those
Mhm.
people, using your uh, you know uh, some of the VCs to like find out who else you should talk to, who might be able to help you and advise you. I think that's like
Mhm.
pretty important to think about, having some people that can provide you with some input on where
Mhm.
things are going. But one of the other things that I think, Anthony Foxx is my manager. He was a former Secretary of Transportation under President Obama. former mayor of Charlotte before that.
Mm-hmm.
He's incredible. And he's a lawyer by training, but has had a huge, like a really rich political experience.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most important things that I think he's tried to impress upon me is that the political policy world is not linear. It's like the legal world is so rules based, but these people that are making the rules are not so rules based. So
Right.
you cannot think of things as being just like, this is the way it happens, because it doesn't happen like that. People are messy. It's like interpersonal relationships. It's who has a grudge with somebody else. It's like which voice is happens to be most powerful in that political moment for whatever political reason. And like, you can't always dictate it out. So you have to like loosen the reins a little bit on like what's going to happen. You can't write it out directly. You'll have to sort of see and play with it and feel it. Which is a little amorphous, but I think it's actually important to understand that you can't completely control the process. You have to be kind of iterative and knowing that things are going to kind of bounce around before you get to where you want to go.
This is such an incredible, like, this is such a value piece because, like, as an outsider of the law world, like, we always view it as, it's a law. So, like, it's some rules that you have to follow. But, like, when you're sort of like humanizing this entire industry, that, like, I feel like we get way more, like, we feel more relevant to the law than, like, before I started, like, chatting with you on this. Like, I think this is so incredible. I feel like what you said were totally correct. Like, law is like actually made by human. And I feel like, just like, your experience with, working with someone incredible like your boss, like, this is like such a really interesting topic. So, like, I feel like, how do they shape around it? Like, what were some guidelines for, a regular person who worked at a tech company or who wanted to build a successful tech company? Is there any resources that we should be looking at that's like incredible for people to understand the general basics as well as, where the law is going?
That's a good question. I don't know. Like, I think that this is the next evolution for how companies need to think about where the law is going. I don't know if there's a lot of resources, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that people will kind of start with their law firms, and that's what they should do. But they're going to have to get ahead of some of these issues and like find other people to help be creative with them. And that's probably what they'll do. I think that at least Lyft's experience was like that. They brought in Kristen in part because she was nimble. She was negotiating with the California Public Utilities Commission while they were just trying to sell what transportation network companies were. And she navigated that as the company's first lawyer and still the GC. And then, we've brought in people like Anthony who help navigate, and bringing in somebody with as much experience with Anthony is not something an early stage company will ever be able to do. But you can get expertise and advice from other people. I don't think there's a lot of ready-made stuff out there, to be honest with you, though.
Yeah, I feel like this is such a white space because, yeah, like, I feel like all the quote unquote startup law courses on the internet was taught by like a professor somewhere, or like they don't have like the real world experience. You brought up a really good point on, like, your boss may talk with like the maybe like government official or something like that. So how is the conversation structured? Is that going to be like, oh, here's like the negotiation, everyone in a suit and then like sitting in a boardroom, here's what we need? Or is this like more like a casual conversation? Let's get a lunch and then let's chat. Like, how is the setting? Like, how do people negotiate on this?
It
We
is
don't have
all of those things. Again, like, I'm so very thankful for Anthony and like his guidance and leadership as I've navigated areas that are brand new for me. I've had a crash course and like learned a ton. But one of the things that I've like so learned from Anthony in particular is like, sometimes you don't say everything explicitly, at least in the political world. Like, it's very different language in DC than it is in the way Silicon Valley will sort of talk about something and sort of get right to the heart of it in a very, I don't know, like precise is the right word, but it's just it's very direct. Anthony has this like beautiful way of speaking where he will kind of be talking around an issue, but he'll say it gently and carefully, get his point across without it being kind of like hitting you over the head with it.
Oh my God.
I think that nuance of sort of navigating the political sphere is like really important, because a way something comes together, there will be strict real negotiations perhaps where you're sitting in a formal room, but the deals happen because of all the other touch points that happen around it too, right? There's the one-off conversation that you have in the hallway. There's somebody talking to somebody else that set up, a chance in coffee. It's just like, you have to have all of those different points, and you'll have to have other people to help you do it, right? Navigate it. You won't be able to do it on your own, but you'll have political consultants, but you have to know the political consultants have like a specific utility. They're never really going to understand your business, but they can help make sure that the right conversations are happening. So there's just like a lot of different kind of pieces that you need to put together in navigating that.
Yeah, totally. I think this is absolutely incredible too. Like I feel like whatever you shared I think it's so helpful. It could be helpful for like a bigger company or a smaller company or just an individual like myself. So I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing. So I have 3 questions, like a little fire chat with you. Like one is like, what's your favorite book?
Oh man. The book that I have like come back to many times throughout my life is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. I don't know, it played like a really important role to me when I was in high school, and it's one of those books that I sort of come back to over time. So I think that's the one that I'm thinking of right now.
Awesome. By the way, you should write a book. I feel like startup policy, or like, I wouldn't say startup, Lyft is not a startup anymore. Like the tag policy, it's like, I feel like demystifying a lot of the things that people were thinking, like, law is strict or whatever. Like, I feel like those are the things that you should talk about. Like, I feel like, or like, for women at work or something, like I feel like, how do you build a structure for like the future young women leader who look up to you to kind of asking for the compensation and like asking for what they deserve? Like I feel like this is super important. Like it can, change a lot of people's life. Anyway, so second question, who made the biggest impact in your career?
Anthony Foxx. I think he has like guided me through, I think, the most pivotal change in my career, and sort of everywhere that I think I'm going to go next. I really attribute to the mentorship that I've had from Anthony.
Totally. So who would you invite to your dinner party?
Dead or alive?
Just anything. It's your party. So.
And right now I'm so starved for human affection that I probably invite literally anyone at this moment. Gosh, who I've always like really wanted to like hang out with? I'm sorry, it would be like probably creative types. My husband's on the more creative side, but those tend to be like really, I get a lot of the Silicon Valley world at work. So I probably like an artist like David Byrne would be really cool. Maybe some other like, artists or thinkers from like another time in history. Maybe Salvador Dali might be an interesting person.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love his work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Such an interesting guy.
Something, we can do that. And then, I'd love to spend some time with Obama. Who wouldn't?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, like great answer, by the way. All the people, well, if you invite all of them, like, can I come and just self-invite to your party? Anyway, so the last question is, where can we find you if you're not at work?
Oh, right now I'm at home in quarantine with my children. I live in Larkspur, just north of San Francisco. But yeah, right now I used to have hobbies. I used to have other things that I did. And at the moment I am just trying to navigate remote learning and the pandemic. So
yeah, I feel you. Thank you so much for coming on to the show, Loni.
Thank you so much for having me. This was super fun.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.